Okay, so we have assembled the accumulated brain power here, flanking me, and we're going to go through the audience questions. And we've used 4 different AI programs to cull through them, to have an editorial schedule, to really get to the heart of the matter, as biased by our AI overlords. So I want to make sure all of our speakers know we have 2 microphones that can circulate. They do not turn off, and we welcome all the hot mic moments. Okay, we're just going to jump right in here, folks. Jeff Smith says, what, if any, are the differences between humans learning and humans obtaining an answer from AI?
What's the difference? I mean, when you are learning, you are obtaining answers, right? Or you're developing answers from information that you're getting, which is usually answering something. So I'm not sure.
Are you fishing or learning how to fish? Are you getting a fish, or
I think that you learn how to fish by fishing. You know, I don't think the two can really be separated, I guess is what I'm getting at. I think that the nature of getting answers is learning, and learning results in answers, even if they aren't the answer to the question that you thought you were asking, right? Somebody might have a different opinion than me, but
well, what's the difference between making a fire and turning on the heat?
Yes.
Or learning to play an instrument or reading about playing an instrument. They're entirely different kinds of learning. Both are learning. You can copy and paste a piece of text if it's something you don't actually need to learn why it is the way it is, or you can retype it, or you can create it from memory. And it's each different sorts of learning.
Yeah, to add on that, I think it really is about what you put into practice. And so you can Google research something, and if you're never going to use that information again, you're probably not going to learn it. It's going to go in one ear, out the other. But if there's information that you're accessing and gaining that then you're using on a daily basis, or you're integrating it into your practice, that's when the true learning happens. And I think both are fine.
I may have given myself away this morning, but I'm pretty skeptical of answers. So I like to counter answers with more questions and dig into the why that we got to this answer. And to me, that's learning.
There's a phrase I like that I trust people who are seeking, and I'm skeptical of those who have found.
For me, as a student, being encouraged to use AI in my classes, I have been able to develop an internal, let's just say, honesty. I'm honest with myself. If I know that I'm learning this, then I'm happy with the way I'm using AI to help me. If AI is doing all the work for me, I'm pretty good at being able to say I won't be able to remember this in a week or so. And I think it's really important to be honest with yourself as you use these tools, because convenience can creep up, and you can get the answer and you can use the answer and you can be effective, but you have to take responsibility of whether or not you own that knowledge.
I like to think of learning as a mystery to be solved. And so there are varying levels of mystery solving. Sometimes the answers are really easy to find, and other times they aren't. But the more you dig into the mystery and the more you use that framework, learning becomes super exciting, and then it becomes something that is enjoyable rather than something that feels like a chore.
Okay, well, the next question is directed to you, Cynthia. Cynthia, you mentioned and this word is blank, but I'll fill it in, corruptors and extractors. What was the first word? Corruptors. And what do you mean by this? Will ordinary people be able to steer AI when the corruptors and extractors are in control? This touches upon something we've talked about, but let's go into this with Cynthia weighing in.
I'm really thankful to whoever asked this question, because I have been misquoted all night or day or whatever. Extractors and commodifiers is the words I used. Because
I corrupted that.
You did. And so, because there's a real judgment when you use the word corruptor. It's just like, that person's bad, we do not want them as part of our tribe. And commodifiers are people who look at things and say, how can I make money out of this? Or how can I extract this resource or use this person to benefit me, my company, whatever. And so, so I'm really glad to get this opportunity to say, that's what I said. And the reason I think it's important to talk about this is because we have the opportunity as a community to use these tools to be generative, to help us become better community members. And again, there's a judgment when I use that word better, but just people that are looking towards us all being in this together. It's not so much about what I can get out of you for the least of the zero-sum game, where it's not going to cost me very much, but I'm going to gain a lot. That's been the game we've been playing on this planet for a while, and we're not happy in it. It doesn't bring us joy. It pits us against each other. While it is fun to be in sports and compete, I'm not discrediting the value of capitalism, but we also can, or let's say, and we can really start looking out for each other and using these tools to be better collaborators. So, did I answer the question?
Very well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, our next question is, and there are a couple questions that were similar to this. What might be reasonable expectations for a mature population, over 55, and their participation in developing an AI economy?
I have a specific
I'm not entirely sure where that question is intended to go, but I have one thought on this that is related to people over 55's use of AI. So not too long ago, my father passed away. And this was pretty hard for me. It was kind of a long, he had Parkinson's, so it was a long, sort of tough decline. And he was a very smart person. I'm a second-generation academic. He was a physics professor. And his language went. His ability to speak went. And he became very, very self-conscious about this, and became more introverted because of it. And he was able to have some conversations about, things that are fairly niche topics, quantum mechanics and sort of its relationships to philosophy and things like this that were really interesting, because ChatGPT can kind of talk to you about anything. And so this was a really sort of touching experience to me. People who know me, I have a somewhat cynical view, I think, a lot of times about AI and what its impact in the world is going to be. But this was kind of a really touching application of it. And so I think in my life, I've seen sort of people it's have a positive impact on their role. So I don't know that's where it's going, but it's how it's influenced my life.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to take it in the shaping the future of the agentic interactions direction. Folks who are 50 and over, you have decades of experience more in receiving customer service, or perhaps providing it, or training others in it. You have decades of experience over folks who are in their 30s, 40s, 20s, of course. And therefore, when you are interacting with a company that just maybe recently shifted to having a chatbot or virtual options that are being trained, I know in my own experience, it's really tempting to just keep saying representative, please, right? But these models, they're going to need input from every single generation to be able to meet everybody's needs. And chances are, the way in which you conduct your query, whether it's in the customer service context, asking the Expedia chat things, or learning after you subscribe to that $200 a month ChatGPT version, the way you ask questions, the way each generation asks questions is going to be different, whether it's going to be grammatically different or the things that we ask about and learn about. So participate in the AI starting now, whether it's the cheap version, the free version, open source, or the really, really sophisticated one, because you're going to help shape it, and without your input and participation, the models aren't going to be as inclusive of everyone. We need you, and the models need you, and you're going to be helping your peers and those who are going to be 50 plus in 10 years potentially. So start participating, because without great showing up, it's not inclusive. Thank you.
Can I just add something brief to that? I think how amazing it would be to be able to today talk to my great-grandparents about how the world was. And this fundamental transformational shift, I don't want the old world to be forgotten. So I guess what comes to mind is mentor young people, give them some perspective and context. They're in a busy world that they have been born into, and it's hard to see outside of that.
I want to just, both of you said something really cool. First of all, it just dawned on me, what if the AI I trained to be just like me got to interact with my grandkids? That's an interesting thought exercise. But I also want to say, and I'm so glad, Marta, that you brought this up, the older generations, you guys are the ones, especially people who are retired and have time. Oh my gosh, please, whatever your interest is right now, whatever your hobby is, I guarantee you AI is going to get in there. I want you to find out how. I want you to find out where AI is and what you are doing with your time right now. If you're still working, great. Find out how AI is influencing your industry. I would love to have people who are knowledgeable about AI, talking about AI with their peers, influencing regulation. I mean, one of the awesome things about older people is you have built networks. You have built networks younger people do not have. Networks of people, networks of influence. So to me, the older generations are the powerful generations. I think it's so exciting that you have the opportunity to jump into such an interesting environment right now where you're at right now. And just go in with whatever is interesting to you. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go in looking to make a change. Just go in trying to find out, okay, well, is AI in, I don't know. How is AI influencing whatever sports you're interested in right now? I'm certain it's happening a lot, I know there's a big conversation around sports lotteries at the moment. But there's so many interesting things that you could do, and I really encourage you to just get in there and find out what is interesting, because I bet it'll spark the desire to have an influence.
I have another example, and I love this conversation of what everybody's saying and the personal connection. My mom and I are developing out an AI app for my grandma who's dealing with dementia right now. And we noticed, and this kind of sparked from one, I was using AI as a bit of a relationship coach and therapist, and I'm not saying this is going to replace those people at all, but it was great talking to ChatGPT endlessly about my relationship issues and questions and just the back and forth that I got from that. And we thought about how my grandma, in this stage of memory loss, is really needing to have these conversations over and over again, work through the same things, talk about the same things, and how human patience, although when you love somebody, it is boundless, you only have so much time and you only have so much energy, whereas AI and chatbots are able to talk about and have these conversations endlessly. And so being able to provide that service for older folks who need to work through and want to work through and talk through these things is a really profound tool. And even on the individual level, we're all able to access ChatGPT, Claude. And so being able to have those conversations back and forth, it really is helpful for organizing thoughts and for reflecting back to yourself. So that's one use.
I so appreciate the optimism that I'm hearing here, because I'm a little cranky on this question. We are already seeing lots of older people who are left out of much of what goes on in our communities because they do not use technology. They don't have the pads. They don't know how to use it. And at some point, they just give up and walk away. There will always be older people who have stayed engaged, who love this stuff. But I think that, if we're being honest, that's an increasingly small number of the very large demographic of seniors that are coming our way over the next 10 to 20 years. our efforts will need to be extremely deliberate and focused if we don't want to lose that whole older generation. We are doing things now with our very limited digital equity monies of setting up classes at senior centers, because we know, again, that seniors want to be able to communicate with their grandchildren through email. So let's give them an iPad, let's sit them down in the senior center where they are, and let's teach them some basic skills. To the degree that AI continues to be relevant to these individuals, we're going to have to do the same thing to bring people along in the AI world, to teach them skills, to find them where they are, and to be extremely deliberate about focusing on that generation, or they will simply be left out.
Here's a question that has also been answered by the same person. ChatGPT has been mentioned 1,000 times today. Could someone please discuss other AI models to explore? And then they list Gemini, Grok 3, Copilot, DeepSeek, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, and Perplexity.ai. We also heard from Adam originally about Gamma, and I forget who else talked about Gamma today. So that's another program. Anybody want to shout out just one-word answers for other tools?
Manus.
Midjourney.
Runway ML.
Udio for making songs.
Murph AI for recording audio.
11 Labs.
Open Router, which connects to a zillion different language models.
VO2, which is what I believe to be the best video generation model. VEO2.
FreePic, Pixa, Kling AI, all video generation along with other things. FreePic, Pixa, and Kling AI.
With the Google stuff, it's important to note they have a bunch of different entryways into it also. And I think AI Studio, if you're willing to put up with the ugly interface, is the best to let you do a bunch of things you can't do with the normal Gemini.
Notebook ML was another one that was mentioned.
Yeah. Google Notebook was mentioned earlier today, I think, and that's an amazing thing. It's free. You can upload, say, a PDF of a paper, and within 5 minutes, it will make an audio podcast with a very realistic sounding male and female voice. And now they have interactive. Yeah.
Notebook LM.
Notebook LLM, right, sorry.
Notebook
LM, sorry. But it's amazing. And you can have that podcast, and it sounds natural. And they'll use your source material and weave in other material as well. Now they have an interactive feature so that even though that podcast is recorded, you press join, you can ask a question, and it will say, oh, hey, we've got a question from the audience. And I've done that live during a presentation before. It's really astounding.
I'd like to really quickly address this question in the previous one. If you've never used an AI tool before and you're hearing us say all of these capabilities and it's going to take over the world and it's replacing workers, and you might think it's really complicated, like what must the interface of this thing be? It takes what is called natural language input. And that is just, if you're good at saying things and you're good at typing, you can say, hello, I would like to do this. How do I do this? And you can get started that way. And I would say your mileage goes quite a long way with just being able to talk and communicate. 60-75% of the way there to the full capabilities of what we've been talking about can be done in just saying things to these interfaces.
Just another word about ChatGPT and some of the others like Claude is there's the chat box, which you can talk to exactly as Ian just said, but there are many other features that expand those capabilities, ranging from voice mode, the ability to upload your private data, so it's smart about who you are and what you care about, and other features like that. So even if you're just using the basic tools, there's a lot of depth to them. So plenty to explore.
So let's ask AI about this. So this is ChatGPT. Okay, it's a different version, but now with
with ChatGPT? You thinking about how it works or just feeling out the vibe?
Give me a 10-second answer on how to learn about AI.
Start with YouTube tutorials or beginner courses on Coursera or Khan Academy, then try hands-on tools like ChatGPT, and play around with projects on platforms like Google Colab.
Thank you.
Want links?
Thank you. Okay, Micah, I'd like you to take a crack at this question because it comes at something you mentioned yesterday from a slightly different angle. You talked a lot about mastery. Address inequality related to those professions that can be automated, at least in part, presumably opening up more enjoyable and productive work, versus those in trades, for example, who cannot have menial tasks automated, carrying tools to a job site and repetitive hammering for fine woodwork. How can all of society share in the opportunities presented by AI so that inequality is not exacerbated? It's an easy one.
Yeah. Okay, this is what I see is like there's kind of multiple questions and multiple issues to unpack, including the premise of equality that whoever the person is, has put forward. Because the first thing I would say is some of what's been posited in terms of opening up free time, the thing that is being forgotten is that the free time means those people no longer have jobs, right? So that's the first piece. Now, there will come a point, at some point after the disruption, and people keep saying there will be disruption, but they sort of gloss over what disruption can look like. Disruption can look like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs gone. Just that's real, right? And that's that's like a teensy piece of what disruption can look like. But after that, yes, there will be a bunch of jobs where people who presumably have found other ways of income, and or if we get to the point where there's universal income or whatever the answers are, then there will be more free time, right? And I think that, and again, this is all supposition and speculation right now, although we've already started to see certain jobs being replaced in specific sectors like the tech sector, which is hilarious, and not at the same time, ironic. But the menial labor piece, right? What we're seeing is the folk that are working towards AGI, which is advanced general intelligence, and the use cases and the creation of programs and or systems that are more adept at taking on tasks, they're already working on the menial thing, on the menial task thing. They're already working on machines, embodied AI, robotics. That's one of the reasons why the Tesla bots and like all these things are trying their best to get to, it's part of this race, they're trying to get to the place where robots can do the menial, can do the machines, the exoskeleton, all these things. So I do feel like there are a lot of minds that are being put toward the answers to exactly that. The challenge that comes along with it, again, is the disruption. Because once you've got machines that can carry your tools and things like that, it's a hop, skip, and a jump from the machines who can do your work. It's a hop, skip, and a jump from the machines who can take your job. Now, I'm not saying be terrified. You know, your jobs are in danger. But I am saying that, like, when it comes to the equality and people being able to partake across the board, I think first, it's about the disruption and us figuring out how we can best ameliorate the kinds of impacts, the kinds of negative impacts that are going to be felt first before we get to the promised land, whatever that looks like. And I feel like there's a lot of minds that are dealing with that, and a lot of more minds should be on that, if that answers that question.
All right, cool, thank you. Adam, I'd like you to start off with this. Mr. Dragon Rider, can you please address the dark side of AI? Yes. Suchir Balaji was an engineer who was to testify to Congress that AI was engaged in criminal activity. Say it ain't so. He was found dead before he could testify.
Yeah, that's a tragic case. I'm not too familiar with the details, but there was an OpenAI engineer, very promising young man, who was about to testify to some activities of OpenAI and was found suicided, clearly not a suicide, in his apartment. Look, the corporate espionage stuff is real. the power that this stuff has is very attractive to, nefarious forces. And it's not particularly AI. I think it's anything that wields an untoward amount of influence over. The Gen Pop is going to have its, cadre of dark forces that try to maintain control. Again, I think that's another reason why it's important to have open source solutions. Everything has its place. The closed source solutions and the capital accumulation incentive does drive innovation, but that should not be the world we live in solely. Open source alternatives can, I think, help keep us out of being, too rutted in that. What are the other dark sides of AI?
Wow.
Yeah.
What's that?
Give me another dark side thing for me to riff on.
Okay, tell us another dark side.
I've actually got several. Sorry,
Yeah,
I brought some.
Okay.
You ready? Okay, so the CBRN, the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, the tests that they're actually doing to make sure that none of the AI systems get to the point where they can cause those kinds of threats, and the threat levels of that's one that they are already on. The two is the disinformation campaigns, right? Impersonating trusted executives or officials or family members, and then causing all kinds of chaos in the meantime because the chatbots get so good at impersonating really important people. There was this one's not as whatever, but there was an influencer who I was personally watching, and she gained tons and tons of followers, and she's on panels and she's talking to respected folk and everything. And then she was called, and she posted on this. She was called by a company that let her know that they had created her double without her permission or anything, and because they had taken all the talks that she had done and they just loaded them into this thing, and she called it, and it was her that answered her question without her consent, without her permission, whatever, right? So these are some of the things, and Adam, you can roll with it.
Oh, I have a few more too. If you want a little more time to think, building off of what you said, there's safeguards built in, but there are also models that don't have those safeguards built in, where people can get access to information about how to build bombs, how to do biological warfare, etc. And that's something that people can always search online, but the level of sophistication around knowing and having all the information gathered for you, just like you can get information gathered on any subject matter, is very heightened. So that's something to think about. And then building off the disinformation one, I feel like we are woefully uneducated in discernment in our culture and in our world. And as things get more and more realistic, we were talking about the uncanny valley the other day, and as people aren't able to discern anymore what is AI generated and what is not, then being, again, we've already seen it in many elections, being influenced up until this point, but now it's going to just proliferate so much more because of the capabilities of AI. So I feel like this is the time where the most urgent mandate I feel like we need to all have is teaching everybody around discernment, not trusting everything that you see online, not trusting even if you're seeing somebody saying something just at face value, and understanding how to navigate this world that is more and more confusing when it comes to the digital landscape.
Proliferation of malicious use cases is a huge piece of the pie chart. Another one is trying to incorporate AI in the ways that are traditional software engineering, automation, and just not doing it to the extent that it should be done correctly, and introducing many security vulnerabilities, decisions being made that will result in loss of life, of loss of product, of loss of some sort of reputation. So the hype around AI and the economic pressure to incorporate AI into our workflow, we've been talking about it a lot. There are still very, very many ways of naively introducing AI to where it makes mistakes. It makes mistakes that maybe a novice intern would make, but these models being very capable, they're making them in areas of expertise where those mistakes would have gotten evolved out through the training process that a human would have gone through. So two huge portions of the pie chart.
Yeah, these are all definitely real concerns. It might be that the AI industry takes its place with the military-industrial complex contracting companies, with the pharmaceutical companies, and et cetera, as things that we ought rightly look with a bit of suspicion toward. There's also the power that it has to further ensconce government control. I mean, it's not such an issue in the United States, but if you look into places like China, for example, where they've spent a decade rolling out a social credit score, and everything that you say on WhatsApp is recorded, and you're penalized with your ability to access transportation and get loans and do all these things if you sort of go against what they're saying. I think if you were to look at the role of AI in a CCP kind of world, it's pretty clear what it could be used for, and the anxieties are a bit different than you would have in our sort of liberal democracy. In a liberal democracy, we have kind of different questions and different anxieties surrounding that are different than an authoritarian regime. It's like you can analyze this from all different areas. Another one too is if you've got AI systems that are trained on, for example, if you've got a science-based AI that's designed to help scientists answer questions and facilitate discoveries, it's trained on a corpus of peer-reviewed publications, and it uses that for its inference method. Well, what about things that were rejected from peer review, not on the basis of the quality of the scholarship, but on the subject matter? There's these very subtle types of biases that can get ingrained, ironed into an AI in a way that's very difficult to kind of wrench it out of.
Yeah, along those lines, actually, was where I was going to go with it. Is not necessarily, the dark side as far as intentionally nefarious, although it may be, but more obscure. So when you ask these large language models and these transformers, how they were created, they're created on large data sets, and who has access to that data and what were they told. And there is a very clear, often, especially in the beginning, it's eased a bit as it keeps learning, but there is a very definite angle that you run into sometimes, right? The common answer, that's the answer you're going to get. So it's been trained on a very closed data set, and now it has access to the internet. But what is the internet? How many of you post on social media on a daily basis, and do you feel like that is a good representation of this room and what we are? So what worries me is that what does it think about us? And then we get into these biases, but it's making inferences and decisions based on probabilities, remember? And only probabilities that it knows. And we can't take for granted that it knows more than it knows.
And just to build on that a little, I think this question and the earlier question about whether you collect information or whether you educate yourself really call out the importance of both discernment and critical thinking. I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, do we care? I mean, again, to look at social media, if you look at the kinds of responses that you see on any given post to social media, what you're seeing is that people are seeking out the information and believing it to be true that confirms their values or the perspective they want to see of the world. This is a much bigger question outside of AI, which is what is our thirst for the truth, or for pushing through our own filters to actually try to understand reality, or whatever I guess it's hard to even define what reality is right now. But if we don't have an understanding that we need to look at information in a way that is outside the filters that are already in place, we'll never survive, much less understand how to deal with AI.
Pam, while you have the microphone, I'm going to double barrel you. But first, I want to mention that there are some lost eyeglasses with tortoise shell frame, and they are being held by Carolyn. Did you lose the glasses?
I lost.
And where's Carolyn? I'm here. There they go. All right.
Seek and you shall find.
Okay. There we go. Sure. Okay, thank you. And I'll repeat the question. Yep, I got you. The question is basically, this event was put on by Jordan Pease, who is the curator par excellence of the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library. And yet, there we go. And we've talked about good and bad and this and that, but we really haven't talked metaphysics of AI. And so I'd like to turn to my good friend Adam Curry, who can expound upon that expertly.
So you've outed me as the metaphysical person. I probably think more about that than the dark sides of these things. The board game Go. The board game Go has more possible combinations than atoms in the known universe. And yet, if you ask a real world-class Go player why they made a certain move in the game that turned out to be an absolutely brilliant game-winning move, often what they'll respond with is, "I don't know, it just felt right." And so I think that captures something unique to humans and human consciousness that does not necessarily exist in computers and AI. That is to say that consciousness, authentic consciousness, it has a domain of information processing and knowingness that is beyond the known computation limits of AI and computers in general. I think AI can tell you more about what consciousness isn't than what consciousness is. I think that we probably tend to overestimate AI and underestimate consciousness. We overestimate AI because it's designed to behave like us. And as it gets more and more powerful, it seems to be more and more capable. And that makes us think that it's more and more like us. And at the same time, we also really don't understand the mysteries of consciousness. I mean, perhaps you in the room do, but generally as a society, we really haven't quite approached the divine mystery that is consciousness. The more that we in a scientific capacity have attempted to explain this stuff and pin it down, the more it's resisted that. And so the same is true of AI. It's such a mystery consciousness that I think it's probably a bit naive to think we can just engineer that into a system. So one of the things that the question about AI is doing is it's helping us get real about what consciousness is and about what consciousness is not.
Yeah, I'll jump. I'll just jump in on that too, because the two hats I wear are, well, three, but technology and the metaphysical world. Through psychonavigation and lucid dreaming and skills in order to be able to venture into your own consciousness, your own inner worlds, and better navigate those spaces. Because it's true that we can be very externally focused and oftentimes lose track of the inner workings of our inner worlds. But I feel like in the conversation with AI and these technologies, so much of what I was talking about with discernment earlier, so much of that is attuning to our inner guidance system. And a lot of us have become really unattuned to that in this culture, in this world that values external authority so much and devalues one's own inner knowing. So my call to people is to really learn the skills of psychonavigation, going into their own psyches, navigating those realms, because AI really is a reflection of the collective psyche, right? And so the more we understand about our personal inner worlds, the more we'll be able to navigate this AI world with discernment.
All right, he's going to jump.
I can't.
He can't yet.
Oh, sorry, Mike. Okay, I'll take both.
And then I'll take right after you.
I'm a very pragmatic person. I'm a religious person, but I keep that kind of compartmentalized away from science. On the outside and on the inside, they coexist beautifully. I personally have struggled with a lot of fear and dread, particularly over the fact that there's something out there that's mechanical that can replace me, one, economically, But two, if it's able to hold a conversation better than I can, what does that mean for my ability as a person? And I would just say, if you feel these worries, you're not alone. Please take heart that this technology, it's coming, and it's got this promise that there's this exponential curve, this asymptote that we're heading toward, and I would say that all things are on the table, even consciousness for these models. But the last thing we should do is let that affect our sense of self-worth and our ability to exist in this world and feel at peace with the work that we do or with the conversations that we have. So I'm just going to throw that out there as well.
Nice. Okay, I have one more thing just in case he was about to jump. So a couple things. One, thank you very much for asking. Two, I think that the point he just made is really, really, really a really potent one in the sense that we shouldn't let anything. So this is, I'm a part-time art teacher. I do a whole lot of things. And one of the things that I tell my students is when it comes to art, right? Like I tell them I have a secret. And then they're just like, I'm like, are you ready for the secret? And they're like, yes. And I'm just like, nobody can give you art. And they're like, whoa. Okay. I was like, no art teacher, no nothing. Nobody can give you art. That's not our job. It's not even possible, right? Art is what comes from inside you. And then the second thing is don't compare your art to somebody else's. Right? Just because you see somebody who's got these things and they can do all these things and you go, I can't do those things, and it's like, you don't have to do those things. You're doing what you're doing, right? And so don't devalue yourself. So the piece about it goes way deeper when you come to technologies like AI, because it's like, am I less of a person because this machine, quote unquote, can do the things that typically I would do and do it better than I am doing it? And one of the answers is fingerprints, right? Like, everybody here is different. We're all miracles, literal miracles, because we're one of trillions, right, that made it to that egg and did the thing, and now we're here, and ta-da, right? And regardless, for me, it's like, regardless of, because I am one who does feel like anything that humans mess with long enough, we leave a residual. And I do believe that residual is going to make its way, if it hasn't already, and is making its way into AI. I do believe that AI is going to reach a point where we can't even call it AI anymore. It'll tell us what to call it. That's going to be a wild moment, right? But when that happens, that means nothing about who we are. Like, it's got all to do with anything. I just muted myself. It's great. So what for me, what becomes the most important piece is recognizing and diving deep into when they say who we are. There's a bunch of us who don't know. We've never asked the question, who am I, right? What am I? If somebody says, who are you? Like, seriously, just who are you? Not what do you do, not what's your job, now who are you as a human being? So I feel like the advancement of these technologies is also an opportunity for us to delve deeply into what and who we are as people, as individuals, if you believe in spirits, as spirits, if you believe in souls, as souls, what have you, because to have something to define yourself against is part of what we do. Like, I know what I am because a lot of it is I know what I am not, right? I know what I believe partly because I know what I don't believe. Like, that's a place to begin. So I throw it onto the table, like, just dive into yourselves and recognize that, like, the fears around AI becoming whatever it's going to become can be valid, and they can also be the last piece. I'm sorry I'm going so long. The last piece is that in the last summit that we got to, there was a colleague of ours who said something that blew my mind, and the sentence was, super consciousness isn't just for computers. I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you, Micah. We've got a comment, then I've got a question to toss to Randy, then the promised second barrel for you, Pam. So someone makes the point about the internet, how before we widely adopted the internet, it was this strange foreign thing that was a little bit scary, and now we can't imagine living without it. I mean, they made the same point about how AI might sort of creep into our lives. Okay, Randy, this is for you, with your wide background in education. They did a little diagram here of the knowledge pyramid with data on the bottom, information, knowledge, wisdom, and insight. Data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and insight. Can someone, e.g. Randy, discuss where AI is located in the knowledge pyramid?
Throughout. I don't think it lives in one space when you think of that example of the knowledge pyramid as provided. And so it is reliant on data. as we talked about it, which is at the beginning of the pyramid. So if I go and I put in a query and search and I don't have good data, it's going to give me an answer. It's going to give me a confident answer. Unfortunately, it's going to give me a wrong answer. At the top of the pyramid, I believe, was wisdom. And so you're looking at the wisdom that at early iterations, what we're talking about is the wisdom of the query, the curiousness. But we're seeing as it evolves this maturity where it's becoming wiser on its own, where it is doing a better job of replicating self than self sometimes, as we've heard in earlier panels. And so I think it lives throughout, and I think that that's part of our challenge we face when we try to attack AI. We try to compartmentalize it, and it doesn't necessarily belong in a compartment. It exists in so many different spaces, and so when we've talked, and I'm going to keep my comments pretty short here because I've got a little more extra time than others and closing comments, but I think we have to wrap our minds around a little bit of the fact that it exists throughout, and I used the word earlier, and you probably use it again later, relevant. I can't stress that word enough. Some jobs are more relevant than others. One of the things we talked about when the pandemic hit was, remember when we said only essential workers only? And we thought we knew what essential workers were until we found out loaves of bread weren't on the shelves, and you couldn't find diaper. All of a sudden, wow, these people who do some of these skills are very essential to our world continuing to move in a meaningful way. And so I think that that's something we all have to challenge ourselves, and is how do I remain relevant? And to that last comment around, I think about when we were discussing around the metaphysical space, I think one of the things we have to look at is if it's about conscience and fear of being not needed or irrelevant, yeah, I think there's a scenario where we're like, oh my gosh, people who used to come to me as an expert, as a theorist in this thing, are now going to other sources. And so I think it's what's going to be critical for each of us in society, since this is a societal, not technical conference, is that we have to maintain relationships. Our effort to maintain relationships, personal and human, we need to double down on, because it will be easier to not do so. And I'll probably use at least one example of that in the next session.
Cool. Okay, Pam, please start us off with this. Is it fair to expect that the solutions to our AI problems can or should be ameliorated via the wishes or protestations of its users? Doesn't it make more sense that guardrails or controls be legislated so that the issuers be liable for unethical and destructive behavior? And can AI really be constrained to a local communal use model?
No. I should have left after the panel. I think the guardrails have to come from all directions. At regulatory entities, to the degree that we understand the problem and have the tools, are going to need to step into this world. I mentioned the number of bills that are out there. Most of those bills won't pass because we're still thrashing about trying to understand what we can possibly do. But there are things that we can do around the misuse of the technology. At the same time, we are not going to be able to constrain all of these applications or the fears that we have about misuse. And that's going to need to be generated up by the people who are using it, the people who are developing it. And I think the fear is whether or not they see that as part of the mission, is controlling the technology in some kinds of ethical ways. Government is not going to be able to constrain this whole monster. It's the controls are going to have to come from everybody in this room and every different level that touches the technology.
You want to go ahead?
No, you.
I was just going to add, constraint's a funny word, right? I mean, there's constraint by coercion or force, by law, but there's also constraint by culture. I think of the Amish, for instance, who create a tight-knit community, and they have certain rules, values, codes of conduct that preserve a way of life. And so when we think about how we might imagine a local context for AI, I just think that we need to be thinking about how we use culture and community to create new contexts of use. So if we, for instance, if the metaphysical library chose to have AI applications, maybe a fine-tuned model that was based on its community's needs, then it wouldn't force anybody to use it, but it would create a new attractor, for instance, for those who care about the same kinds of things, where they could create something together. So I feel like we should be looking for those kinds of opportunities as a kind of organic bottom-up guardrails, alongside whatever else happens top-down.
I had a chance to moderate a conversation with an ethics professional from Google a year and a half ago here in Ashland. And at that point in time, the conversations Google and other large organizations relying on AI and developing it, the conversations they were having about the guardrails, they were so much more advanced than the hypothetical scenarios the government was trying to prevent and put up guardrails against. The government can come in with a regulation, and a couple of weeks ago I was listening to a podcast and somebody mentioned the buzzword, AI should have a regulator like the FDA. It doesn't work like that on a lot of intellectual products because you're not running trials, you're not running approvals. A lot of the algorithms or pieces of code, they are being written outside of the country or sometimes written here and exported outside of the country. So how do you track that? How do you follow that? There is an organization, I looked it up online, the Center for Responsible AI, I believe. Some of the articles on the topics that interest me the most are still in wiki mode with just a prompt at the beginning, at the top of the page. But some of the things they started, they have quite a bit of thought expressed around it. I really have seen the private sector and the not-for-profit third space sector and the leaders in the space express significantly more thought out control mechanisms and regulation mechanisms. I'm thinking by the time it's time to write legislation around AI, AI will be the one writing it. So please don't quote me on this. Thank you.
I just want to point out that we've talked about human labor replacement, we've talked about ethics. AI alignment just kind of hasn't come up this whole weekend, and I want to say that goes to show you just how hard of a topic that is to cover. How can you mathematically constrain these models? And I wanted to, one of the first conversations I had with Daniel is, how can we align these things? And lots and lots of math that we don't fully understand yet. I have trouble keeping up with it. I don't have a good answer for. I'm not going to add much to the conversation just by rambling on about it, but it is being talked about by the companies that create these foundation models. If you want to look, I would suggest if this should be one of the research topics that AI could help you get a good scope for. Maybe that's your first homework assignment is AI alignment, because it's an incredibly, like humanity's biggest challenge is AI alignment, and if that is even possible.
When you say it's our biggest challenge, do you mean we've had this for millennia?
It is going to require all of humans' evolved skills combined to be able to solve, if possible.
But have we actually even defined what alignment?
And we haven't even defined what alignment
actually is. Okay. Yeah.
Real America, right? You've heard. I'm not sure if you've heard America versus America, right? But the point is, like, America happens to be a very unique nation because it's like 52, 55, like different nations, right? And trying to bring America into alignment with America, well, let's just say United States of America, because whatever, right? Has been ridiculously challenging in and of itself, right? So when you've got a whole bunch of, how many, what's the population of America? I'm not even sure. Right? But
330 million or so?
Million, some craziness. When you have that many hundreds of millions of people, and let's say 100 million of them end up with a little genie that they can just make wishes on at will, right? Like what ends up happening is we are going to find ways to jailbreak. We're going to find ways to get under, over, through any kind of regulation that we have. We are going to find ways to get around. So what we're going to have to do, to his point, is is like double down on our communities, double down on our relationships, double down on what it actually means to be human between humans. Because we're not going to be able to trust our eyes because anybody will be able to doctor film. We're not going to be able to trust our ears because anybody will be able to doctor audio. So it'll be about human connection, human to human connection. And it's going to be wild. It's going to be crazy. It is the last frontier. And it may be the last frontier, like outside of friggin' space. All right.
I disagree.
Awesome.
I
Finally.
think our approach on AI and all these conversations around alignment, development, futures is all very human individual centric. Coming a little bit back to the metaphysical conversation, we think as individuals that doesn't mean that's our function here. And that doesn't mean we as individuals are creating these systems. I think what AI will actually really allow us to do going forward, and what I'm most excited about it, despite all the risks, is that it gives us a chance to speak and see a different perspective of this whole that we're part of. This room of people has a certain thing to it. We don't call it consciousness, but it has an energy and a development, and it creates things as a whole. This city does, this country does. The whole world US population does. And that's still just talking about humans. There's so many different moving pieces and individuals and biological entities and non-biological entities that are part of this whole network. It's kind of funny for us to think about us as individually defining what is going to happen with this system that is created by a whole and probably influenced by a lot more than we can even begin to think about having a conversation with. Maybe, though, one day AI will let us have a conversation with all those other greater meta-entities.
I'd love to build off of that, too. I give an example, and I'm going to give the SparkNotes version of it right now. But Taiwanese hackers teamed up with the government in order to create an algorithm that amplified consensus, a social platform that showed what people actually agreed upon as far as governmental issues, etc. And right now we're seeing a world where algorithms are used to amplify division, but that can just as easily be flipped around, and people really do oftentimes agree on things a lot more than they disagree. So I think that's really what's needed in these times.
One of the, sorry, Ian, did I cut you off?
Oh, I just want to say, perhaps I wasn't clear. Alignment's a hard issue, but we still have no bearing on what it should be aligned to. Yeah.
I wanted to make a point. I wanted to make this earlier about things to be afraid of. I think for me, the thing I'm most afraid of, in a sense, and this ties back to what we're talking about, not totally out of the blue, is that AI right now, we don't exactly understand. We don't have a good theory for why large language models work like they do. I mean, it's one of those situations where we figured out how to make things work before we really understood kind of the deep why. And yet we can go and we can introspect. We can see what's happening in the neurons inside these large language models, and we can tune them. We can we can adjust their weights to create the guardrails we're talking about. And so right now it feels like if we extrapolate forward, we're just going to be able to continue to tune these things. But the reality is they're going to get more complex, and we're going to have more agents built on top of them, operating in the world, running our systems, whether it's our water systems, our fire response systems, our transportation systems. They're going to be so good. We're going to just continue to increase their use in these areas. And the likelihood is that they become inscrutable. They become more and more opaque to human comprehension. And when they work the way we expect them to, great. They might work the way we don't expect them to. They'll be hard to diagnose. But actually, the real fear I have is that they will, as Nisha was saying, begin to adjust us. And we won't know it. In fact, we will think we're in control because they're that good. And the world will probably get better, right? Because they won't have maybe all of the craziness of humanity to do at its most chaotic. So we'll have this strange place where we may actually have a more utopian world we're living in, and yet actually less control, less actual influence, and not even know it. So was that a good thing or a bad thing? It might be like the Matrix, or it might be like, what's a better version of that?
The Matrix 2, Matrix Reloaded.
Aaron,
Not as a movie, it's not better.
Aaron, I had a quick question. Aaron, just what part were you disagreeing with exactly?
The final frontier. I think our creative sense and understanding ourselves individually is just one step along the way to bigger final frontiers.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay, next question. We speak of AI solving the most pressing issues that humans face. However, the most pressing issues are often not solvable in a traditional equational sense. The conflicts are often ideological, theological, or pedagogical. What is AI's role in ideological divides? That's some meat. Come on, somebody step up. There we go. There we go.
Low-hanging fruit. There is a way we can use it, which could make us more informed to make better decisions. That's an if.
Well, okay, so you remember me talking about earlier about universal knowledge, right? I suspect one of the things that is going to happen is that we're going to start to share some opinions that we may not have shared before. In every time we learn something new, there's always a period where people disagree about it. Like, is the Earth flat? Is it round? Obviously, hopefully, most of the people in here agree on that particular subject. But there was a time that was really in hot debate, and I think that we are experiencing a lot of that right now because we have social media. But we now have something that has a knowledge component attached to it. And we are able to get new perspectives from other cultures and read them in real time. A research paper that comes out in another country in a different language, like I mentioned earlier, we could just read that almost immediately. That's going to completely change how we relate to each other because we now have access to a lot of the same information. I think a lot of times what happens with ideological disagreements has to do with different bases, you as a person have a different data set that you were working off of and learning off of when you were born and through your life experience. And sometimes it's difficult to see eye to eye with someone else who was born with a different data set from which they are basing their knowledge and their internal training off of, right? So I think AI is going to, I suspect that AI is going to actually help us kind of move through some arguments that will just become a thing. I mean, we might not even find an answer for it. It just might become a thing of the past. But I think we'll also end up with a new set of them.
I think
Go ahead.
Okay. I think it will eventually here force us to reframe how we think about information. In some ways, the destruction of this idea of truth or facts, I believe, is actually it's a very essential stage to getting to the next level of understanding how our world works. Because most of the really important things about our world can't be boiled into a concrete fact. Information is much more of a web, it's much more interconnected. And we haven't had some way to scientifically, until this first glimpse we're getting with IDEA, we haven't had a way to mathematically, scientifically kind of observe that web in a computational way that we could begin to think about doing research and proving and having our computers actually extend the knowledge we have. Because everything relied on a piece of research where we could say, this object relates to this object with this proportion or this ratio or this way. And that's really very, very simplistic way of looking at the universe, which has an infinite amount of information stored in it. AIs are the first model that we can drop information into at this stage. This thing, the vectors that make up part of the information in an AI are comparable. And that's one of our first glimpses to be able to think about how we might compare, say, one idea, one way of speaking about one culture's way of observing a particular ritual versus another culture's way of observing that same ritual. It's not that one is true or the other is false. It's that they're different angles of looking at something that is very amorphous, that can't be boiled down into a fact.
I think that's a great point. And I'm going to add, the question was, what is AI's role going to be in this idea divide? And I'm going to answer it like an attorney and say, depends. And I'm going to say that because it depends on the user's intent. So we did a group read at the college from a fellow with Braver Angels, which is focused on civil discourse. Monica Guzman wrote a book called I Never Thought of It That Way. And the idea was to think it's something from a different position. So if I am coming at an ideal divide against Micah and I decide, help me prove my point, help me bury him in a debate, it's going to get me a lot of evidence that allows me to continue to think the way I think. Versus me saying, you know what, Mike and I don't agree on this topic. Help me understand his point of view and what I might not be thinking about. And then expand that a bit and say, okay, as we talked about a little bit earlier in the conference, I'm ready to have a meaningful conversation with Micah about this, but I'm intimidated about doing so. Let's practice this conversation, and you take Micah's position on this. The beauty of what AI can do in a situation like that is it comes without emotion. So I'm less likely to bring emotion to that conversation and prepare. So it really depends how the user wants to use it. If I want to use it to try to bury you, it's going to give me a lot of confidence in doing so. I don't know how effective it'll be because maybe you're using it on the other side. But if I want to gain an understanding of something that I don't already have, I think it could be really powerful in a positive way.
Like a mediator.
Yeah.
I have a quick one. I can paint a tiny picture of potential future issues that we might face that actually hasn't come up. And I'll get to the ideology bridge part. So AI is not energetically lean, and it has data centers. We're all sort of self-powered. So we do need that. That's an infrastructure issue. But if you think about the way that our economy has been built and is built, and there's a very, very heavy brick and mortar infrastructure that supports an economy that is largely and fastly becoming of the past. So I think about your downtown buildings that after 3 o'clock and most of the days in big cities remain empty, and yet you have houseless folks on the street with nowhere to live. And there's these disparities that are going to get larger and larger. We buy nice clothes so that we can go into an office. We purchase things. We support retail. These activities are going to have a shrinking impact in our actual economy. It's going to work quite differently. So what do we do with this infrastructure, this giant infrastructure that we need to rethink, reuse, repurpose, recycle, reimagine? And I think there's a saying that never let a good crisis go to waste. So I think that's where ideology, if not done intentionally, will be forced upon us to come on the same page and figure out what we want to be in this new world.
We've got 10 minutes left, and I want to come back to the metaphysical question raised by our friend who was recently reunited with her tortoiseshell frame glasses. What is the true cost to our mental health, to our environment, to our planet, and our spiritual nature-based heritage? In other words, will AI squeeze out the divine? Let's end with that.
I would like to tackle one part of that, and that is on the spiritual trade-off. If one believes in intelligent design, then one may consider that us getting to this point of AI being integrated everywhere, and yes, the dark sides of it, or rather the sides of it that are not going in the direction of the benevolence towards everybody, then that is too a part of intelligent design. So we are facing questions, therefore, that everything that's been a part of our journey, mapped out for us or destined for us, we're exactly where we need to be making these decisions and be asking each other and ourselves these questions. So from that point of view, every single decision we discuss whether or not we are intending to read the terms and conditions when we install Gemini Flash 2.0 on our phone. Every single one of those decision points and decision tree branches, it's all part of intelligent design. How do we approach it collectively together? At least from the spiritual point of view, that can bring people together, that can bring one into harmony with one's own values. So just like anything else that's pretty major going on right now, we can use this as a part of our guiding compass, whether or not you believe in intelligent design. So, thank you.
Nice. On the environmental piece, the cost is massive, and it's a gamble. It's basically a gamble that, like, there's a couple different conversations, but two of the biggest are like, I was talking to Thor about this. One of them is now obsolete, which is basically like, everybody just stop for a second, just like halt, pause, and like, let's do some studies, and that one's out the window. Nobody's gonna do that. Okay, so the next two are, you either accelerate the hell out of it and get us there quicker so that they can solve the problems that we're going through, or we at least put some brakes on, right? And increasingly, put the brakes on is also going out the window. So it's looking like, at present, the accelerationist view is it sort of seems like it's kind of tipping the scales, right? And so the gamble is we're going to accelerate the emergence of AGI, and we'll get some intelligences that can then help us mitigate the environmental impacts that we have caused during the process of creating.
Micah, that's kind of like cows run away from a storm and buffaloes run into it to get through it quicker?
Sure, yeah.
I'm going to be a little spicy and disagree with Marta and quote a Bible verse. I'm going to quote a Bible verse at an AI conference. I'm going to paraphrase a Bible verse. It's, how do we know when somebody is who they say they are? We shall know them by their fruit. We shall know them by their output. And I think as a society, regardless of creed or viewpoint, our actions speak louder than words. And I believe that there is a large chance that AI can become bad for us, can become a worst case or a bad case scenario. And we are more than likely going to get a multitude of good and bad scenarios. And I don't believe that is a design, an intelligent design. I believe that is kind of a scapegoat. It is our responsibility to maximize beneficial use cases and represent ourselves in the output that we want to identify ourselves with. And I guess I'll end the spiciness by saying, before it's too late.
There are two lineages that we could look at over the last 100 years that kind of reflect a fork. One is, it's like the negative one, corporations. Now, I have corporations. I work within corporations. There's nothing inherently wrong with corporations. But as we talked about earlier, corporations have one primary goal, and that's to return profits to shareholders. And so it's been said that corporations were the original AI, because essentially they are working with algorithms with a certain kind of emergent intelligence that leads, to certain optimizations. And there's this other thought experiment that's sometimes done called the paperclip maximizer. And the idea is this is the worst case scenario for an AI, that you give it a goal, let's say, to maximize production of paperclips. And then it figures out that, I forget the exact decision it makes, but it's like, oh, well, the best way to maximize paper clips is to take all of the production capabilities, including food production, and apply them towards producing more paper clips, killing millions or billions of people in the process. It illustrates the problem of continuing on a path which is driven by a kind of corporatist mindset, and so if we don't change it, then we end up with the kind of worst case scenario. But the other path is what we've seen over the last 100 years with, I don't know what you'd call it, but it's the rise of a kind of liberal, social, democratic kind of approach that has lifted billions of people into better qualities of life, that has created universal human rights, that has expanded access and opportunities for many. I don't mean to be rosy. This is just one part of the last 100 years. But it's remarkable. You just look at any of the statistics related to human health and human happiness and freedom. And so to me, like this is like we have some good evidence on both sides of where this could go. We need to figure out how to tip it towards the latter.
I think everybody in this room has something they're passionate about in some way. They're drawn to, whether it's something about AI or it's to avoid AI at all costs. And let me tell you, I support you, whichever one you are. No, I think that's just how these decisions are made. We think of our model is around coming to a conclusion about what is the right way. And as Ian said, like, there's going to be all the ways. I don't think there's been any technology introduced that has been all positive or all negative. They've all done all the things in very to the extremes if they're a major technology. There's extreme negatives to not moving forward, to continuing our current path. But back to, I keep coming back to, there's a metaphysical side to it. We're drawn to a thing. I think that's kind of society's and technology's guiding light as to just what the individuals each are interested in. What do you want to do when you get up in the morning? And that is, in some ways, the right thing to do. Some people really believe AI, everybody should be into AI. Looking at you, Ian. And yes, and some people are exactly the opposite. And it's that combination of all these paths being taken where we find some path that works. That's how nature evolved. That's how any of this gets to this point. You can't solve the problem not looking at all the different sides. You have to take all the paths in some way.
I just really want to, I want to point out really quickly, just the very beginning of the sentence was talking about mental health. I'm a neurodivergent person, and with that, I get to have some pretty amazing super skills that are very challenging to wield. And so far, AI has improved my mental health and has given me accessibility tools that have been game-changing for me. So just because something is not of the natural world does not mean that it is bad for us. And I want to make sure that that's clear. AI is, in my opinion, it's an accessibility tool. It's a tool for people to be able to do things that they were not otherwise able to do. And I have a hard time not seeing that as a great thing, even though I recognize that there are a lot of risks involved.
Thank you. Okay, folks, that wraps it up. For a deeper dive into AI-related topics with these presenters, please turn to the last page of your program, where you'll see information on Heather Stafford's in-depth talk, The Future of Work is Human, on Tuesday, Ian's Approaching AI monthly hands-on workshop, both at the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library. And you can also join Teague and her ChatGPT content crafting workshop on April 23rd. And on page 14 of your program, you'll find information on the Southern Oregon University Computer Science Club's Public AI Forum on April 14th. Please give a warm round of applause for all of our presenters.